This channel has covered the US futsal scene exhaustively over the last couple of years, particularly the dysfunction we see. I've pointed out things I thought were really great or excitable, and I've also pointed out things that I thought were poorly handled by leagues, by US soccer, including the league I help with now, which is FCS. I've been critical of them in the past as well. I think that what is most interesting about this path these last 2 years and us covering the US scene is what I'm about to say actually supports a case against my last video when I criticized US soccer for not giving futsal enough attention and not giving it the resources and the thoughtfulness it deserved. Now I'm kind of going to cover the other side of the coin and say, hey, there's a lot of things wrong within our community which justifies US soccer not paying attention to us. And a lot of it stems from a feeling from the US community from the failure for the United States to qualify during the CONCACAF Championships for the World Cup this year. A lot of people felt like we took a massive regression in where we were when we made it to Lithuania compared to where we are now. It was an uninspired performance by our team. It was a pretty flat approach by our coaching staff, who were clearly undermanned and just underqualified to be in the position they were in. And then we see the shift from the video I covered most recently with spending up some budget with the expectation of making it the World Cup, which is a bit of a silver lining, using it to find some real futsal players, which was also exciting, but just a lack of thoughtfulness even with the appointments of interim coaches and people filling the gap until we find that steward to take care of our sport for us. And it created a lot of swell over this last 6 or 8 months from the community, and a lot of just angst about, when are we going to get better answers? When are we going to get a little bit of respect? And it created a demand for answers throughout the futsal community. Now, I don't think was heard very loudly outside of our own circles, but it did create a feeling of a pivotal moment within the US futsal scene, which was very interesting. I got to see this firsthand with some phone calls and some discussions that I was involved in over the course of the summer, talking with the domestic leagues. But with all that in mind, and with that segue of the domestic leagues, I think the outlook for futsal in the United States, specifically the league side, is more bleak than ever. We take a look at the leagues today, and I'm going to start out on the East Coast with the newest league that I'm aware of, which is Super Liga. They can't seem to even finish the season. Last year's championship was called off. The regular season champion was crowned in its place. Then this year, we see that the end of the season just kind of tailed off and that it wasn't fulfilled. And from talking to folks out on the East Coast, talking to folks even with ties within Superliga, it seems that the problem is a little bit twofold. Number one, people's egos are getting in the way of actually growing the sport. And I think that goes across the entire board of the United States in a lot of different levels. And I've talked about that slightly here on the channel in the last video specifically. But the other problem as well is running into teams that claim they're interested in playing in a futsal season, but don't really care about futsal. And they do it till they lose interest, and then they quit. And unfortunately, in the case of Superliga, that's created egg on their face in the sense that they are unable to finish the season. They can't even get a team to quit during the offseason. And we've even seen that happen to some other leagues, which I will address here as we move down the line. But the other thing I think, too, as long as I'm being hopefully constructively critical of these leagues, I hope it comes across that way and not as just me whinging about everything that's wrong, but really no social media connections to the league itself. A bit of a rough website if you follow it. It's the only way you find out and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together as a detective that those final games never happened. Now, the teams that are healthy in that league continue to play on, and they also get involved in other leagues and divisions of niches of this sport that I'm not huge a fan of, but they stay active, which is important, and find a way to create that revenue stream. The other thing looking ahead is to league NFPL. There seems to be this mass exodus that goes on every offseason for the last couple of years, and it's created a lot of fear of even joining the league in the first place. As I talk to people that are out of market of the current NFPL divisions, it seems that people are afraid to join because they see that turnover that's gone on over the years. You can chalk some of that up to a down period during COVID when you look at the full history of NFPL, but when you look at the recent history, they've lost several teams the last 2 years. And now they're looking at having a 3-team division in the Midwest and a 4-team division in the Southwest. And hopefully those Midwest teams, whoever wins, two of them looking somewhat suspect based on their history in other leagues. Hopefully they're able to afford to make the trip to the Southwest this year for the championship as it shifts down to Phoenix, Arizona this year. And I have some reservations about only possibly one of these clubs being able to afford to make that trip of the three. So an already volatile situation for a regular season becomes even more volatile to see through that championship. Is this going to be a pivotal year for NFPL in either a survival mode or the ending of an era? It's going to be very interesting to see. I did create a video on that as well over the summer. So if you guys want to hear more about my thoughts on how pivotal this season is for NFPL, you can follow it there. But the other thing that I find that's really interesting outside of the turnover, outside of the exodus and the lack of teams, is my fear of what I mentioned before, and that's that reputation that it has created of seeing these teams leave all the time, and now other markets are not interested in joining, or they are fearful to fully commit. So they always have the conversations with our leagues, but they are fearful to join any league because they see the amount of turnover. Which kind of brings me to FCS, and the one I'm obviously most familiar with at this point. But, you know, one of the things that I've been critical of FCS up to this point was that they weren't on YouTube advertising and showing and creating a little bit of buzz. And now they are, which is super exciting. That's part of the reason I'm here, is to help build that up and build a team around it. And I'm very proud of the team that we have and what they've accomplished so far. But when you think about FCS, what they've really accomplished up to this point is zero, nothing. It did not create enough of a stir outside of Lansing, Michigan to move the needle in any particular direction, but it was a safe place for teams to find out if they could vet the process of playing at this level that we see all this turnover at. So it was done behind closed doors. It was created in a short-sighted format where teams were able to do that with less commitment. And even then, you look at last year where we saw an attempt at a regular season and 3 teams just quit mid-season and didn't see it through. And a lot of that leads to a term that I've found myself using way too much over the summer and the fall, and that is the fool's gold of futsal in the United States. The harsh reality is the majority of teams and clubs within our country really are in dire straits, either financially, either with manpower, either with resources. And they look really good on social media, but that's really where it ends. And we found that the teams that are in these graveyards of U.S. futsal, along with the leagues that are in these graveyards of U.S. futsal, are the teams that tried to fake it till they could make it and never made it. And it seems that more and more we see this turnover. I fully expect to see FCS see some turnover as well over the next couple of years. I think that it's just a part of the nature of the amateur sport and where it's at right now. That said, I do want to see U.S. leagues do more to sustain and grow the sport as opposed to looking at it as a piece of the pie, which leads me to what my experience was over the summer and what I think is currently wrong in holding back futsal in the United States. And I'm going to start with something that might get some of these folks I'm talking about, if they're watching this video, to shut it off. But I think that egos are very much getting in the way of actually growing this sport and creating some sustainability and focusing on the bigger picture. Right now, a lot of people protecting their own, a lot of guarded folks out there, a lot of people who think that everyone's out to get them, even though they're not. And it's at all levels. Leagues, I felt that way talking to a few people within different leagues and even different regions that didn't have leagues. It was very bizarre. And then also, where places where leagues overlap, there's obviously some clash. And some of that stems from past history, even before these leagues were formed. And I don't know the background on that, nor is it my business, but it is clear that it's still creating a bit of a thorn in the sides of these folks in several of the regions I spoke to, that has stalled out the growth of the sport really in a big way, because these people aren't willing to work together. So, and everyone's not pulling on the same rope in the same direction within the U.S. futsal scene, and it's happening across the country. It is not unique to any league or to any organization or any team. But it is very clear that the fool's gold that has been created is just that. A lot of glitz and glam and not enough substance to create that sustainability. And it's happening not only at club levels, but also at the league levels as well. I think that one of the other things that's really being missed here during this bit of swell we're seeing behind the scenes and kind of quiet swell we're feeling within the futsal community demanding more is a lack of understanding of what's truly at stake here. You know, what happens if these leagues fail? Who then takes care of these leagues? Who then trains these true futsalers that I'm hoping to see make their way up in athleticism, make their way up in skill to be able to knock out some of these arena soccer players in our current roster that are really making it purely on athleticism and making up for their lack of talent in their athletic abilities and being in a system that's far further established. And I think that what people don't realize is that there's so much more at stake than these little amateur leagues. And I also think it's important to consider that the current leagues that exist are extremely likely not going to be a part of whatever professional scene may develop here within the United States. And the reason for that is they've done nothing to prove that they're unique, or they've done nothing to prove that they're doing something that an investor can't just do on their own and solve their problem with money. So I really, really implore the leagues and the teams of this country to consider these words as a warning. I think that we have not done enough to force U.S. soccer to address futsal. They have not done enough to address us. And we need to do more to own our backyards, do things right, hold standards, and then when they see that there's a true swell with true backing and actual organization, then maybe, just maybe, we'll get the support we need to create a professional atmosphere here in the United States. I'm curious what you guys think about my comments. A lot of my own opinion in this video, which I typically don't like to do, but I've had some experiences that I wanted to share vaguely with you guys at this point. I think we'll get in more detail about them down the road when it's appropriate, but for now, I think it's not the right time, but we certainly will be discussing them moving forward. And I also want to hear what you guys think about what else needs to change within futsal in the United States as a whole, not just outside of within these leagues, but as the futsal community as a whole that could possibly spur a movement here in the United States. Can't wait to hear from you guys in the comments. Also consider joining us in Discord and continuing the conversation there and doing it live in a live text format in a group. And until I hear from you then, don't forget, play with your soul.